Yes, I'm Peter Michael Gish. I was called Mike by my mother and father and my brother, who was a year and a half older. In 1941, in the yard of our house in Westport, working with my brother, who we called Jim, or Carl, I'll use his name as Carl, and my father, we weren't getting the shingles quite horizontal enough. My father was scolding us while my mother came out and announced that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. That changed my life, changed all of our lives. We were actually in the same senior class at Staples High School in Westport when he decided that he had to enlist, and so I went down with him in December of 1942, and he enlisted in the Marine Corps, which is the reason I ended up in the Marine Corps. Actually, I was following my older brother. The next year, it was possible for me. I turned 17. I joined the Naval Aviation Program and enlisted in March, as soon as I was 17, down in Washington, and went on active duty in July of 1943. I had in mind that I would become a Marine pilot and provide close air support for my brother, and that was my motivation in aiming to become a Marine Corps pilot. My brother came home at that time. He was so proud that I was going to be a Marine Corps pilot, and he had his leave. After that, he was shipped out to California in Camp Pendleton, preparing to go into the Pacific, which he did. Summer, I think July of 1944, when I got a call from my parents that my brother had been killed in action on Saipan. And we were very close, and that changed my whole life. But as I went through training, the emotional gap was very great, and I decided I would devote myself, when I went out, to art, to become an artist. It was the only thing that sort of filled up the gap that I felt at that time. I knew I had to go to Paris to become a real artist, so I went to Paris in 1950 and studied there and was pursuing my art career when I got a message from the Marine Corps. I was recalled during Korea. I elected helicopters. I thought if I was sent overseas, I'd be doing medevacs and that sort of thing, and that sort of seems the thing for me to do. This was my service. I was not sent to Korea because I fitted into that sole surviving son category, so they didn't send me to Korea. I guess to compensate for that lack of danger, I was at an air show in Dayton in 1953, and on a 7-plane formation, and the number 7 behind me overran me, and I was in the first mid-air collision in helicopters, and fortunately was able to get the damaged plane onto the ground, and the pilot, the major that hit me, he crashed and burned, but he wasn't killed. So anyway, I got this call that they'd seen that I was a successful artist, and here I was, a lieutenant colonel of the Marine Corps, helicopter qualified and whatnot, so they asked me to go to Vietnam. I accepted the invitation and was given orders, flight orders, as well as my main task was, first I'd heard of it as a combat artist. That was my first experience with real war. I did several medevac missions, quite a few missions, and I was very pleased I got an air medal, so I got an air medal for my flying in Vietnam. I'm glad to be on these medevacs, and I've painted some of them where we were taking this young man to a hospital ship off the coast of Vietnam. There are a lot of very moving experiences. Then my Marine Corps career ended. I was retired in 1975.
ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. The deadline has come and gone. The Iraqis are living on what President Bush calls borrowed time. It is no longer when
I
the
called
war will
up
start, but when.
The history division and spoke to Jack. I said, what's the chances of you sending an aging combat artist up into Kurdistan? And he said, you're out of your mind, Mike. Don't even think about it. About 7 minutes later, the phone rings and he says, Mike, the general wants you to go. I wasn't there soon enough to see the great suffering and the sanitary means, but I had enough and with the helicopters and everything to depict pretty much that operation. I had retired from the university and was going to finishing up work on the Kurdish operation, and they called me and asked me, this time it was their request, they wanted me to go to Somalia, so that was the biggest operation I did. It was a completely different atmosphere from Iraq, from Kurdistan. From the moment there, driving from the airport, we had to have armored vehicles. All the buildings pockmarked with shell holes. The people that wanted to do good couldn't do it without us there to protect them and facilitate that. And even worse, in Somalia, a food convoy would be stopped and robbed at gunpoint. Nothing could happen to help these people without the military. It was most interesting, but exciting for an artist, because the women dress in such bright colors. Visually, it was just so exciting. You have to be there. It's as simple as that. I went to a mess night, and General Zinni and the colonels that hadn't pissed off the enlisted men too much were invited to their mess night. And General Zinni talked, we had lost some Marines there, and a place was set for them at the dinner just in memory of them. And then he talked about what was necessary for a Marine officer and then the physical shape and everything. That was obvious, but then the mental development and reading and the developing as a person, whatnot, he was very inspiring to all the people there. And then it was his 50th birthday, and then he said, and I was very touched by that, this was July of 1993, and he said, it's also Colonel Gish's 50th anniversary. And I hadn't figured out it was just 50 years since I had enlisted, or when I first went on active duty. Here I was 67 years old, and back on active duty, and he acknowledged that, and that was most gratifying. I've been, greatly because of my brother, and I took the risk of being an artist as a full career. Very fulfilling. I felt that he would have been proud of what had happened. And I thought of that, well known at Dartmouth, the poet Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. In my case, with that phone call in 1967, I never would have been on active duty at my age except for the art. And they called me, and the art and the Marine Corps service came together. And that was most satisfying, and now more than ever that I've gotten in reasonable health with my new hips and pacemaker to be 92 and still painting. So that's my story.